Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be talking about passing data to a method and also the return statement. This is a continuation of our Unit 6, defining and calling methods/functions. And we're going to continue more or less where we left off from the last video, where we talked about methods themselves, how to define them, and how to call them, more importantly, as well, in our program. So I'm going to go back to the program code that we looked at. This is a little bit different in terms of the comments. I just took out some of the comments just to make it a little bit shorter so I could display it on the screen in its entirety. So this is pretty much the whole program. If you recall, we started out with a pretty big static void main part of our program. We had all the code in static void main, and that's how we've been coding our programs up to now. So the last time what I did was I took some of the functionality out of the static void main section of our program, and I broke it up into 3 separate functions, each doing different things. So just really a quick run through of what the program does. We took we took some doubles. We just defined some double variables, num1, num2, my result, and a string called again. And inside of a do-while loop, we displayed a welcome message. We were skipping lines just to make the console display a little bit more easy to read. We asked the user to enter a number. We then got the 2 numbers, they were doubles, and we multiplied them together. We placed them into my result. Then we displayed them, skipped a couple of lines, asked the user if they wanted to multiply more numbers, and then if they said yes, we just restarted our program. If they decided not to, we skipped a couple of more lines, and then we printed a goodbye message. So what we did was we broke some of that out. We took the welcome message and we put it into its own function method. So we actually removed 4 lines of code from our main statement, put them up in here, and we used a public, which is it's accessible. It's code that's accessible to all parts of the program. Static, which just simply means that it's not related to a class or any other data structure. It just stands on its own. And then there's void, which basically means the function is not required to return any type of data. And we'll get to the return stuff in a minute. Okay, basically void just means that all the work is being done in the method or the function, and that's where it stays. Okay, we follow this is our declaration statement, by the way. Okay, the first line of a function where we declare it, like declaring a variable, we create it. We include our function name, and that's a name you make up, and then we always include the parentheses at the end of the name. That line, that declaring line, does not get a semicolon. We do need a couple of curly braces, a set of curly braces, and then the method or function code is inside those curly braces. So we broke out the welcome message. We also broke out the goodbye message, and we also put since we were writing 2 console write lines to skip messages, we were doing that in quite a bit of our main section. So we took out that code and we put it into a skip 2 lines, a function called skip 2 lines. So coming back to our main line, all we did was simply do a call, which was the function name followed by parentheses, and then of course semicolon. The calling statement does require a semicolon, and that that transfers control up to the function. The code inside the function's curly braces is then executed. Once that's finished, the control is returned to the next line under the calling statement. And in this case, we have another calling statement to skip 2 lines, which basically skips 2 lines. It does the console write line, blank console write line twice, and then we enter our data. And you'll notice that skip 2 lines is called several times in this program in the main line. So we avoid a lot, avoid a lot of redundant code. So functions, among other things, make our code easier to read, but they also allow us to reuse certain parts of the code. We don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. I don't have to keep coding console write line, console write line. I just have to put it into a function, and then all I have to do is just call the function. So it seems trivial in this example, but it does add up after a while. It does make our main line much smaller than it was. And eventually we end up with a goodbye message, which is up here. So now what I want to do is I want to look at maybe doing another function that's going to take care of the multiplication, what we're doing here. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to code a new function, a new public function, static and void. At this point I'm not worrying about returning any data, but I will in a little while. We'll show that. And then I'm just going to call this calculate it. That'll be the name. I'm going to then put some curly braces here. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some of the functionality, and specifically the multiplication and the display, and I'm just going to copy that code. I'm going to remove it from static void main and put the code into my function. Then I'm going to replace this with a call to my function calculated. Okay, so now obviously I'm not done yet. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to, in my function call on line 49, I want to send some data from here up to here. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to send the numbers that I'm getting, okay, from my user, which is placed into a variable called num1 and then num2. So since I have the data in those variables, I want to pass those variables up to my calculated function. So I'm going to place those inside the parentheses of the calling statement. Okay, I'm gonna literally put num1 and num2 inside the parentheses, the variables separated by commas. Okay, so don't worry about the squiggly lines. We're going to fix that in a second. Coming back up to my function, I'm going to need to establish parameters there, or arguments sometimes they're called, that are going to catch the data. It's almost like I'm having a game of catch with somebody. I throw the ball, which is the data, the person catches the ball. The person catching the ball is going to be the parameters in the function. Okay, so I need to put those parameters inside the function's parentheses. So what I call these doesn't matter. They don't have to be called num1, num2. They can be called anything, okay, because they're actually going to be two separate variables, two different variables from what's in static void main. So to do this, I'm first going to need to define what type of variable it is. And since I'm using doubles here, I'm going to have to first indicate the data type, which is double, and come up with a name. I'm just going to call it A, and then my second parameter is going to be B. Okay, so double A and double B. Okay, the other thing is my result doesn't actually exist in my function because of variable scope. Variable scope simply means that if I go outside of a code block, if I declare a variable inside of some code and I go outside that code block, the variable doesn't exist. You're not able to reference it. So I'm going to have to create my own variable for my function. Okay, and then I'm going to change these variables, the names of these variables, to reflect the names of my parameters. Okay, so what's going to happen is when I call calculated, I'm going to pass calculate num1, num2. That's going to be received by double A and double B respectively. The result is going to then be calculated, placed into my result, which is now a new variable. I defined that here. So I don't really need this here anymore. I can get rid of my result in my main line. Okay, because I'm not actually using it. And then I'm going to display it here. So let's take a look. Let's see if this works. Okay, so I'm going to enter a number. Okay, my result is then displayed, and that display is taking place, the calculation in the display is taking place inside of my calculated. So getting back a little bit to variable scope. Variable scope determines the visibility or availability of a variable to the rest of a program. So if you'll recall that I removed result from my static void main section and I defined it inside of my calculated. So if I try to reference, this, my result, in my static void main now, my result is going to end up being something that's going to be a mistake. It says the name my result does not exist in the current context. That means that my result means nothing to the main section. It's actually a variable that's belongs to the calculated function, so it's not referenceable outside of the calculated function. So if I try to reference it in static void main, it's going to be an error. It's just not going to mean anything inside of static void main. Once we're finished with the function, all of the function's variables actually get deleted. They are slated for cleanup by the system. They don't exist anymore once the function is done. So everything is done inside the function. All of the things that are defined in the function cease to exist once the function is completed. So we just have to keep that in mind. Okay, our next video is going to focus on the return statement. So any questions, please let me know. I'm going to put the code for this particular guided lesson in the comments below.